December 2nd, 1993. A small house. Middle-class neighborhood. Medellín, Colombia. Inside, one man. Unshaven. Dirty t-shirt. Hiding. Outside, 300 armed officers. Closing in. The man inside that house was worth $30 billion. He owned private jets, a personal zoo with elephants and hippos, a fleet of exotic cars, an entire private city he built from scratch inside the Colombian jungle. At his peak, he was making $420 million every single week. Forbes magazine called him the 7th richest man on earth. He was so powerful, he once offered to personally pay off Colombia's entire national debt, $10 billion, just to be left alone. They said no. And on this cold December morning, the most feared criminal in the history of the world was cornered like an animal in a house he had been hiding in for less than 24 hours. What happened in the next hour ended an empire. But the story of how he got here is one of the most extraordinary and terrifying things you will ever hear. Picture a small Colombian town, red dirt roads, chickens in the yard, a farming family scraping together every peso. A boy watches his mother leave before sunrise every morning, return after dark every night for almost nothing. He's 8 years old, and he has already made a decision. This will never be his life. His name is Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, the third of 7 children, born January 1st, 1949, in a town so small, most people in Colombia had never heard of it. Here is what made Pablo different from every other poor boy in that town. He was not angry about being poor. He was insulted by it. There is a difference. Angry people complain. Insulted people act. By the time he was 15, Pablo was already running small scams, stealing gravestones, reselling them, forging lottery tickets, moving contraband cigarettes, not for survival. He always made that clear to people who asked, for the feeling of taking something the world said he could not have, of beating a system that had given his family nothing. By 22, he was moving stolen cars and small cocaine shipments across the Colombian border. He was not the biggest player, not yet, but he was watching, learning, mapping the entire operation in his mind, waiting for his moment. And in the late 1970s, his moment arrived. Here is something most people do not know about Pablo Escobar. He was not a drug manufacturer. He was not a chemist. He did not cook cocaine. He did not grow coca. What Pablo Escobar was the greatest logistics mind of the 20th century. In the late 1970s, cocaine was exploding in America. Demand was skyrocketing. But the supply chain was primitive, disorganized, dangerous, leaking money at every point. Pablo looked at the cocaine trade the way a general looks at a battlefield. He did not see a drug operation. He saw a broken supply chain waiting for someone to fix it. He built distribution networks with military precision. He recruited pilots, bribed customs officials, compromised police officers, purchased politicians. His method was simple, elegant, brutal. He called it plata o plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe or take the bullet. It was not a threat. It was a business policy, and it worked. By the early 1980s, Pablo's Medellín cartel controlled 80% of all cocaine entering the United States. 80%. 15 tons. Every single day. The money was so incomprehensible, so physically overwhelming, that his accountants wrote off $2.1 billion per year. Not lost to theft. Not lost to bad investments. Lost because the cash got wet, was eaten by rats, or simply could not be stored fast enough. $2 billion. Written off because they had too much money to keep track of. Let that sit for a moment. There is a place in Colombia, 7,000 acres of land, that Pablo Escobar built from nothing. He called it Hacienda Naples. It had a private airport, a bullfighting ring, a motocross track, a personal museum of antique cars, and a zoo. A private zoo with elephants, giraffes, exotic birds, rare reptiles, and hippos. Pablo imported hippos from Africa, 4 of them. Today, those hippos are still in Colombia. Their descendants have multiplied. There are now over 80 wild hippos roaming Colombian rivers, decades after Pablo's death. They call them the cocaine hippos, the most surreal legacy any criminal has ever left behind. But Pablo was not satisfied with being rich. He wanted to be loved. He built entire neighborhoods for the poor of Medellín, houses, football fields, schools, a church. He handed out money in the streets, showed up at children's football matches, paid for local kids' education. The poor of Medellín called him Robin Hood Paisa. They genuinely loved him. And Pablo understood something that most criminals never do, that love is more powerful than fear. Fear makes people obey. Love makes people protect you. So he bought love, systematically, deliberately. And then, he decided love was not enough. He wanted power, real power, political power. And in 1982, he ran for Congress and won. For a brief, extraordinary moment, Pablo Escobar was a legitimate Colombian politician. A man responsible for hundreds of murders sat in the Colombian legislature. Then one man stood up. His name was Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, Colombia's Minister of Justice. He stood in front of the Colombian Congress, looked directly at Pablo Escobar, and exposed everything. The criminal record, the drug connections, the murders. All of it, publicly, on the record. Pablo was removed from Congress. 6 months later, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was shot dead on a Bogotá street, on Pablo's orders. That assassination was the moment everything changed. Because killing a farmer or a rival trafficker or a police officer was business. Killing a government minister was war. What followed was one of the darkest chapters in the history of any country not officially at war. Pablo bombed a commercial airliner, Avianca Flight 203, 107 passengers, all dead. He was trying to kill one specific government witness who might have been on board. The witness was not on the flight. 107 innocent people died anyway. He'd placed a bomb outside the DAS intelligence headquarters in Bogotá. The explosion killed 52 people, wounded over 1,000. He put a bounty on police officers, $3,000 for every officer killed. Young men from the slums of Medellín became assassins for pocket money. One police officer was being killed in Medellín every single day. Pablo ordered the assassination of 3 presidential candidates, a Supreme Court justice, newspaper editors, prosecutors. He was at war with an entire country. And for a while, he was winning. In 1991, something happened that sounds impossible. The Colombian government negotiated with Pablo Escobar. He agreed to surrender. In exchange for one condition, he would not be extradited to the United States. The Colombian government agreed. And Pablo Escobar, the man who had bombed airliners and declared war on an entire nation, went to prison. But here's the thing nobody tells you about that prison. Pablo designed it himself. La Catedral, his prison. On a hilltop outside Medellín, it had a football field, a bar, a jacuzzi, a waterfall, guest rooms for visitors, a disco. He continued running his cartel from inside. He held meetings with his men, ordered executions, managed shipments, made deals. From a luxury prison he had personally designed and the Colombian government had personally built for him. When the government finally tried to move him to a real facility, Pablo simply walked out through the front gate and disappeared. Into the mountains, into the city, into the shadows. And the hunt began. After escaping, Pablo still had billions, still had loyal men, still had weapons. What he no longer had was anywhere safe to sleep. The Colombian government, now with full American support, formed an elite unit called the Search Block. One mission, one target: find Pablo Escobar. They were joined by a group of vigilantes called Los Pepis, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, former rivals, people whose families he had destroyed, ex-cartel members who had been betrayed by him. They began systematically burning everything Pablo owned, every safe house, every asset, every business connection, every lawyer who worked for him. Pablo's empire was being dismantled piece by piece, while the Search Block tracked him from above. He moved every night. Never the same house twice. Always moving. Always hiding. The man who once offered to pay Colombia's national debt was now sleeping in strangers' beds and eating whatever his last loyal man could bring him. His family tried to flee the country. Germany refused them. Mozambique refused them. Peru refused them. Nobody wanted Pablo Escobar's family. Then, on December 2nd, 1993, Pablo made one phone call to his son. The call was traced by the Search Block. He stayed on the line 37 seconds too long. 37 seconds. That was all they needed. The Search Block surrounded a modest two-story house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellín. Inside, Pablo Escobar. One bodyguard, and nothing else. No army, no cartel, no protection. The most powerful criminal in the history of the world, alone in a small house in a neighborhood he would have considered beneath him 10 years earlier. The gun battle lasted less than an hour. The bodyguard died first. Pablo ran through the house, fired back through windows, tried to escape across the rooftop. He was hit 3 times, once in the leg, once in the torso, once behind the right ear. Close range. Pablo Escobar, the 7th richest man on earth, died on a rooftop in a dirty t-shirt. He was 44 years old. The Search Block officers who photographed his body were smiling. After years of watching their colleagues die for $3,000 bounties, they had won. His family was left with almost nothing. His wife and children eventually settled in Argentina under assumed names. Hacienda Naples, seized by the government, was turned into a theme park. The exotic animals were redistributed, except the hippos. The hippos, as they had always done, refused to follow anyone's orders. Pablo Escobar spent his entire life running from one thing: the house he grew up in, the poverty, the smallness, the feeling of being nothing and nobody in a world that did not notice him. He ran so far, so fast, so violently that he became the most noticed man on earth. And he died in a house not much better than the one he was running from. The thing he was trying to escape was the last thing he saw. That is not a coincidence. That is the oldest story in human history, told again, in blood, on a rooftop in Medellín. Subscribe to Historva, because history does not repeat, but the people in it always do.